Do you ever wish you could sit down with a cookbook editor and find out what really goes on inside a publishing house? Welcome to Everything Cookbooks, the podcast for readers, writers, and cooks. I'm Molly Stevens, and today I am here with Kristin Donnelly. Hey, Kristin.
Hey, Molly.
As an aspiring author, if I can remember way back, thinking about who my editor might be, a cookbook editor sort of loomed so large.
Totally.
Right?
Yeah. It sounds so fancy, right? My editor.
Yeah. And you wanted to get one.
Yeah, 100%.
I just think if you could sit down and talk to one and figure out what they were looking for when you're trying to sell a book. I know you've met with some editors through your work as a collaborator.
Yeah. When I work as a collaborator, a lot of times the proposal will go out to many different editors through an agent. They'll set up meetings, and a lot of times I'm part of those meetings. So I have gotten a little taste of different editor styles and different publishing houses. So it is really interesting.
Yeah.
I think it's cool to try to bring, some of that knowledge to the forefront.
Way back, I think it was season 1, season 2, we had Jennifer Sitt on. And Jennifer's an editor at Clarkson Potter. And then we have talked to a couple editors as part of our Insider series, but we really haven't brought them onto the show. So I'm excited because today we have a real live cookbook editor.
Yeah.
So today we have Sarah Kwak is going to come, and she is a senior editor at Harvest, which is an imprint of William Morrow, which is part of Harper Collins publisher. And Sarah's going to help us untangle that whole, how that all works together. Sarah's edited a long list of best-selling books from authors like Dory Greenspan, Jacques Pepin, and she's also worked with brand books like Betty Crocker, Red Boat Fish Sauce. So she's got a lot of different titles she's worked on, and she's got a bunch of new ones coming out in the next few seasons. So we are super excited to sit down with Sarah and find out what goes on behind the curtain.
Yeah, and I was especially interested to talk to Sarah because I have met with her before, and I just always find what she says about a proposal very astute.
Nice.
She's extremely experienced, but also up and coming, still somewhat young in her career. So she's somebody that we can all keep an eye on.
Well, Sarah Kwak, welcome to Everything Cookbooks.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Well, we're really excited you're here, and want to thank you for taking time out of your very busy schedule. Before we get into what it's like to be a cookbook editor and how it all works, you're a senior editor at Harvest. How'd you end up there?
Yeah, that's a interesting journey for me. I feel like a lot of other people in publishing, at least at publishing houses. I majored in English in college. Immediately after college, I just tried to get into the industry however I could. I didn't really have any connections. I'm originally from Philadelphia, or that area. So my first job in publishing was actually in children's at Simon & Schuster in production. So I worked a lot with printers, with editors to try to get, like the tactile kind of books for your babies, the touch and feel books, color. So I really fell in love with books as an object in that job. And then I really wanted editorial. Originally, I wanted to be like a literary fiction editor, which definitely, I'm glad that wasn't my path. And then I came across a job with Rex Martin at Houghton Mifflin Harcourt. And I think without her, I wouldn't be a cookbook editor. If you're not familiar with her, she's this legendary cookbook editor. She kind of just took me under her wing, and I grew under her for, 3 to 5 years there. I just stayed there for a long time, which I think is really rare in an editorial assistant position. And so I continued to work and learn and grow, and just eventually stayed. Even after she had left, I feel like I inherited a lot of her stuff, and then the pandemic happened and there were just a lot of shifts, and I luckily somehow made it through all of that. But that's basically what happened. And now I'm at Harvest, which is a continuation of HMH. It's different, but it's very much the same team editorially. So
that's cool. I remember I was introduced to you very briefly when I was meeting with Rux, and she actually introduced you as her protege, and she felt like...
We spoke with Dory Greenspan as well on the podcast, and she because she, of course, worked with Rux. Dory talked about working with you after Rux left, and in very glowing terms. So,
I mean, I feel like Dory is the nicest person I've ever met in my entire life. And that's not an exaggeration. But I am really pleased and flattered to hear that. And then I also realized, like, I think I was only focusing on the publishing aspect of that journey. But I did want to mention, like, I loved food my whole life. I feel like in college, that's when Lucky Peach had started. And that's when I recognized food as something more than just something you eat every day, or something that, I feel like I had that quintessential child of immigrant experience where people would make fun of my food if I brought it to school when I was younger. So I think that's when I recognized it's kind of a facet of everyone's identity, and really got interested in that kind of thing. So I feel like when all of this was happening together, that's when I met Rux and really ignited my passion for cookbooks specifically.
right. So you had this desire to be in publishing, and then it collided or came together with your interest in food, and you were in the right place.
Yeah.
So imprints are so interesting, and I think it's hard if you're not in publishing to understand how imprints work. It's sort of a two-part question: is how do various imprints work within a larger publishing house, and then maybe more specifically describe Harvest.
I would say it's kind of like a brand. So like if you think of in makeup or handbags, there's like LVMH, which is, in my perspective, like the big house publisher, like Simon & Schuster, Penguin Random House. And then under that, there are like the smaller brands, which are, or not, they're not very small, but like Chanel, I don't know, Celine, whatever. So I think if you look at the different imprints, you'll see there's a different style and different interests. In cookbooks specifically, there's definitely, Harvest, for instance, we really like to focus on prescriptive nonfiction. So anything that is like a how to improve your life, make your life a little bit better. I think that's kind of like our key line. So I think the more familiar you are with each imprint and what they kind of like, you kind of are able to recognize that. So each imprint is led by an editorial director with a team of editors. And so that taste is kind of dictated, from my perspective, by those individual people, what their interests are and things like that. At Harvest, we're really platform-minded. And so we do have discussions with our marketing team, with our publicity team, just to see, I think it's all part of that formula of what kind of book should we publish? Is this a book that we'd like to work on commit to working on for the next 2 years, developing, and then from then on, like promoting, and then long past on sale, like year-round pitching. So
within your imprint, it's not just cookbooks, right? It's how to, and so cookbooks are part of that. And how many editors work at Harvest?
We're a pretty small team. So there's my boss, who's the editorial director. There's another executive editor and me, and then 2 associate editors who are also assistants. Each imprint size varies. Some teams are huge with, 5+ editors. Some are really small with just 2 or, 1 editorial. Like Rux, for instance, had her own imprint at Houghton Mifflin Harcourt, and it was just her and me. So it really differs. In terms of just cookbooks, it's my bread and butter. So I really only focus on cookbooks, and I typically do anywhere from like 4 to 6 books a season. So like up to 12 a year. And I think that kind of is similar with what other editors do.
Yeah, because I think I read somewhere, it's on the Harvest website, that Harvest, the imprint, does under 50 books a year. So there are probably smaller imprints, and there, as you said, there are bigger imprints. So it just gives a sense of scale. And I think, for people considering writing a book, knowing the types of books that a various imprint publishes it's a really important first step. And because we do want to get into, how you acquire and what you're looking for, and reviewing pitches. And, sort of a broader question is, you mentioned that Harvest thinks about platform. And I'm wondering if there's ever an instance where an idea or an author can make up for a smaller platform and still be appealing to Harvest.
I think that look at platform is really Harvest specific. So, and I've been here this is the only place I've been in my whole career. So that's what I know and what I'll speak to. But yeah, in terms of platform, if you don't really have one, I feel like the benchmark changes too for what we consider a big platform. Like 5 years ago, I think anything over 100,000 followers on Instagram was considered good. And now that's considered small.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's not to say we don't do books with authors who have smaller platforms. One that really comes top of mind for me is Mayumu by Abby Bellinged.
Yeah, we had her on the podcast. She was great.
Yeah. I loved working with her. When the proposal came in, I fell in love with it. The material was just so cutting edge to me and so new and radical. And it was during a pandemic, and it felt like she was really building a community around her, which I think is really important. If you don't have a huge following, then how engaged is your following? How plugged in are they? How supportive are they? When I was reviewing Mayumu to acquire, I think the material was just so compelling, and I felt really strongly about it and kind of just wanted to flex, whatever muscles I had to try to get it, to acquire it. And we looked at other things that might help with the platform. Abby got a ton of publicity for it. Our publicity team, I think, felt that there was a really great hook here. So I think that's one thing. It's not like the social media follower number. And we actually do look at stats beyond that. So it's not just how many followers you have, it's how engaged are they. We look at growth levels. We just do an entire analysis. That's one arm, but there's also publicity, press, events. If you're a speaker that goes on tour, there's different ways that you can have a platform and reach people. It's not just social media. So I think that's something to consider as you're pulling your proposal together.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. First of all, I appreciate that you just said it, because I feel like there's this sense among aspiring authors and in the industry that hey, what used to be considered a big platform or big social media following is now not cutting it anymore. And there's frustration around that. And I feel like some people sort of shy away from saying it, but it's also nice to hear the multifaceted ways people can build their platform. It's not exclusively social. And Abby is such a great example. There's a star quality to her, so it's evident.
Yeah. And her recipes are really, I have never seen anything like them before elsewhere. So I think they're really, unique. And just for context, I think when I acquired her, she had under 5,000 followers on Instagram, wow, which is really, micro-influencer, or what we would consider a micro-influencer. And again, this is just coming from my position at Harvest. There are other imprints that clearly would do books that feel compelling, even without the author platform. And that's something that if you're looking to write a cookbook and find a publisher, it's something that an agent would really help you figure out which imprint to submit to.
Yeah. And that's always a question we ask editors who work at traditional publishing houses, if they ever consider unagented, unrepresented manuscripts, or if everything's coming through an agent.
So usually when something comes in unagented, you can tell in terms of how it's positioned, how it's put together. Things that I'm looking for specifically are missing. They are emphasizing things that I don't feel would help break out a book, but are, they're really cool accomplishments. So I will read them and reject them. I don't think every editor will do that. Some will just ignore it. But I feel like if they took the time, I might like a rejection and a quick explanation. Doesn't take me that much time at all. And then there are cases where we find someone that we really want to work with and reach out to them. And sometimes we connect them to an agent, and sometimes we don't, depending on, whatever that author's wants are. I think it just really depends per situation, but I do read everything that comes my way.
Do you have an example of a way an author might position a book that feels not right, or that an agent would probably do differently?
I think what an agent can help with positioning an author's proposal is really focusing on things that they know that will react to or be more receptive to. So including your social following number, but also if you have a newsletter, like the open rate for that, other comps. This book is much like this other one that sold really well. It's like this one that editorially has a similar subject or approach. They also think about photographs, what it might look like. It's kind of, they're able to give a more holistic perspective on the proposal and how, it goes from developing the manuscript to submitting it to the production of it, all the way through on sale, the promotion of it. So That's the biggest difference. I can't think of anything really specific off the top of my head.
Yeah, it's like a market. It's like just an understanding of the market and those relationships. Like I imagine, I mean, I know my agent is this way where he just knows the specific taste of different editors. So he might highlight things slightly differently based on who he's talking to.
And I think comps, too, are one that an agent, by nature of their work, has a bigger understanding of more global reach to understand how to do comps.
Yeah, I do remember this one proposal that was unagented and they included comps, but they were just totally not right. Or I wouldn't use them for comps for our sales team. For instance, like they might be great editorial comps, but sometimes they use comps that are like 10 years old that I just can't use even if they make sense to me. So just little things like that really make a huge difference for me.
With comp titles, it's such a challenge as an author and when I work with authors on them because they serve all these purposes. And from an author perspective, it's like the editorial perspective. Like I want my book to be like this editorially, but behind the scenes as an editor, you're sharing those with your sales team, right? They're looking at it totally differently. Like they're looking at how did a book like this sell?
Yeah. And I think it's also just thinking about how our sales team will pitch it to accounts. I think having that knowledge also really changes the kinds of comps that you include. So I do love all the editorial comps, and a lot of times they do make sense to me. I won't necessarily ever share all of those with our sales team. I'll look for more things that are recent. You know, the authors have similar platform size, definitely same trim, same format, things like that. So
We've talked to a lot of authors who spend time on the design of their proposal, down to photos and, making sure that it's this beautiful package that reflects the book they are hoping to write or wanting to write. Where do you stand on design in terms of a proposal?
It's never been a defining factor for me to acquire a book. If I see that it's really well designed, I'll take it as a sign that the author and the agent are really dedicated and take the time to make things look nice and refined. It also does help get a sense of where they're going in terms of what the book might look like at the very end. It's kind of like a dating profile. Like the more photos you have, the more information you have, it's easier to kind of suss out the compatibility. Yeah, I really appreciate it. It's like a stunning, beautifully designed proposal. And some agents put a lot more, you kind of can tell which agents prioritize that a lot more than others. But, some of my best-selling books, the proposal was a Word document with a recipe list, some sample recipes, comp titles. There was not a single photograph in it. So it's great to have, not necessary.
What are some of your best-selling books, actually?
I would say Erin Jean McDowell's The Book on Pie. It hit the New York Times bestsellers list. It's still, every year, especially during baking season, it does so well. And Erin has been a really incredible partner. We did Savory Baking together as well. I also worked with Jacques Pepin, who was originally Rex's author, but I've kind of taken over his program. And we did Jacques Pepin Quick and Simple, which I think published into the pandemic and still, it was really incredible, like just out of the gate, hit the list. And I think one of his first bestsellers since Heart and Soul. So I was really proud of that one. I'm
You're looking at your shelf.
She's glancing at her cookbook shelf.
And it's also really hard for me to like brag or list all of these.
Yeah, I won't make you pick favorites.
We had another one with Jacques, Art of the Chicken. I really loved working on that one because Jacques wanted to do a chicken book, and he's really, if you're not familiar with him, he's a really incredible painter as well. And I had the privilege of visiting his home in Connecticut, and I was just kind of blown away and felt so privileged and lucky to experience it. I kind of wanted to see that in the book format. So the book is part memoir because when I visited him, he would just share all these really incredible stories. He's had an incredible life. And then he cooked lunch for me and was just kind of explaining what he was doing as he was cooking. And it was just kind of, and then he has an art studio and just filled with canvases and all of his paintings. And it was an unforgettable experience. I'm glad that we were able to kind of pull it together in a book. And I think a lot of people felt the same way.
We hope you're enjoying this episode of Everything Cookbooks, but it does take resources to make it happen, and we'd like to invite you, our loyal listeners, to help us keep the lights on. To support the show, go to everythingcookbooks.com/support. There you can find links to any upcoming insider events where we go even further behind the scenes of our cookbook publishing world. You can also leave us a review, order books through our affiliate page, check out our t-shirts and sweatshirts and other merch, or buy us a round of coffee. Every little bit of support really helps the show keep going. Thanks for listening.
I'm wondering about book sales. I mean, we're talking about Jacques, but for mortal authors, how do book sales from a previous title affect decision? If you think it's a beautiful package, it's a great idea, they're the one to write it, can an author make up for a mediocre book sale second time around or something?
Yeah, definitely. I would say it's really challenging. So we'll definitely, if it's not your first book, we'll look at your past book sales. That's definitely one of the first things that I do when I'm reviewing a proposal. And then I'll look at what might have happened in that. And the agent usually also explains like what the circumstances were. Maybe, the book published into the start of the pandemic and, things just kind of hit the ceiling. We'll look at the circumstances of what happened for that first book and try to figure out, do a postmortem basically from as much as we can. And then also look at what's changed since then. Has the author continued to grow their platform? Have they been continuing to promote the book? Is the new material compelling? Do we see any factors that weren't a consideration for the first book? So it's definitely an uphill battle, I think. If you have a track that's declining, it's really hard to overcome that. But if there are factors that are you're now, a daily contributor to a major newspaper, or you now have national media presence or something like that, you definitely can overcome the past book sales. It's just, it's definitely a ding against.
It seems like if you do overcome it and get a second book or whatever it is, that book can then pick up the first book. Those sales can pick up because suddenly you're rediscovered. So I know it's an uphill battle, as you say, Sarah, but it can work.
Yeah. We've definitely had cases like that where, maybe an author's first book isn't the best selling, but I feel like every time an author publishes another book, their past books also pick up, which is really great.
You mentioned something in your bio that you spend your free time scrolling TikTok and Instagram and testing viral recipes. Molly and I were wondering what tends to really grab you? What makes a recipe appealing to cook or an author appealing to reach out to?
I don't know. It's kind of, I always feel lacking as an editor in that way, because I'm always I'll know it when I see it and I can't really explain it. But in terms of TikTok recipe videos, it's, if I have all the ingredients on hand and it seems easy enough to put together, I'll put it together. When the feta pasta was going viral, I made that at least 8 times, even though I'm lactose intolerant. I mean, feta is usually okay, but I'm lactose intolerant and I couldn't resist. And then in terms of authors that I really go after, I think it's, is it someone that I actually cook from, that I look for their videos when I'm cooking or looking for recipes. I kind of look to see if they're serious about their recipes. They're not just kind of throwing things together on camera. I feel like there are certain kinds of creators like that. I'm more intuitive. I'm like, oh, I like this and I think it could work. And I do some research and reach out more than crossing off a checklist.
Yeah. My sense is, as a cookbook editor, as you're reviewing what comes in across the transom, as we used to say, or, that comes on your desk, but you're also out there actively trying to find new things and bring people in.
Yes.
You're also looking for trends and trying to have your list stay current with what's going on. And, we've all seen trends between, restaurant chefs and home cooks and social media influencers and TikTok and all that. I'm just wondering if you have a sense of what trends we can expect to see in the next few seasons or even beyond, or what you're sort of anticipating.
Oh, that's a good one. I don't know. I feel like it's changing so quickly now with, especially with TikTok. I feel like the trends are they're micro trends and things like that. And just because something's really trendy on social media or, in food in general, in the food media space, doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to translate to book or to a book format. I think right now there's a lot of focus on homesteading, on preservation, on really easy, achievable cooking. I think during pandemic, cookbook sales were really up because I think people were just staying at home and they had to cook for themselves. And so it's just interesting seeing how the market is shifting post that. So I think it's, people are getting busier now. and the economy is really tough. So I'm expecting more like very easy, simple, affordable kind of cookbooks to do really well. And then I feel like this is a trend for every industry, but like it's more of a winner take all kind of thing. And so, it's the huge celebrities or, the food personalities. I'm expecting to see a lot more from them.
You mentioned a couple things. The economy is tough, and there's like the economy maybe for the reader, but then also in book publishing, I've heard just from multiple people in the industry, like costs are going up for book production. So
yes.
I imagine that is also factoring in.
Yeah, the economy and like the change in the formula of like we do a P&L for every book, a profit and loss statement. And so that's really changed the scales, I guess, on that. So like printing and shipping has just been more expensive. Some of our books we've had to increase the price on when we're selling them. I feel like that's an industry-wide thing. And so it means that we need to sell more books per book to make it work. That definitely contributes to like, we need to look for bigger platforms. We need to look for bigger ideas, things that are more commercial.
Yeah. And you mentioned before that it's about 2 years, give or take from start to finish. And so when you're thinking about trends, that's something we also have to think about. Like if it's a micro trend that's probably going to flare and extinguish within the next 6 to 8 months, probably not a book idea.
Yeah. And, like I've been seeing a lot of like decorative flowers on cooking, which I personally love. If I go to Whole Foods, they sell those edible flowers for decoration, which I love to use. And I think it's a growing trend on social media, but it's definitely not something that I would necessarily buy a book for. So I think that's like a situation of a trend that is notable, but not necessarily something that translates well to a cookbook. I feel like there was a lot of diet trends when I first started in the industry, like paleo, keto, Whole30, intermittent fasting. And I feel like that's kind of slowing down a little bit. People are more interested in like intuitive eating, balanced, flexible, like achievable, maintainable kind of thing.
That's encouraging. Like real food?
Yeah. Like food that you actually want to eat and it doesn't feel like you're restricting yourself.
The winner take all thing is such again, I'm very glad you said that because I don't think we often hear that level of honesty. But I'm also wondering if within an imprint, I'm imagining there's some balance. Like, okay, we know this book isn't going to be a huge, it's not going to be one of our top sellers, but it's a book we really want to see make it to the marketplace. We want it in our portfolio. We want to represent this title.
Yeah.
That can be balanced by some enormous bestseller.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I've been like all doom and gloom and like it's so hard and like you need a huge platform and all of that. But I like the first thing your proposal has to do is like I have to like it.
Yeah.
If it's a 2-year project, that means I'm committing my time and my team's time to you for the next 2+ years. Like we're still working on your book even beyond that. Mm-hmm. So it has to be something I like and what I think other people will like and something I actually enjoy. I do feel like the balance of my list, it's not just really huge sellers or celebrities or like sales driven kind of books. They're things that I actually find really compelling, that I want to have in a book form and that I feel strongly about.
Yeah, I get what I'm hearing you say is that even in an imprint like Harvest that's very platform driven, there's room for smaller voice or smaller platforms.
Yeah, I
relatively smaller. Yeah. Because I do think, like, when I think of a book from Harvest, you have hit this sweet spot to me where it's like, yes, it's commercial in that it's like a book that's widely appealing, but you also have like authors with real deep expertise like a Dory and a Jacques. But it is cool also to see, I don't know if it was like you felt like it was a risk like Abby's book at all, but it is nice to see that occasionally you can do something that maybe it's a little bit less of a sure bet.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like Abby's book, I was really girding my loins with her book when I brought it in. I was like, I really want to do this. And like, if you say no, like, here's all the reasons like we should do this. So I pitched it and they were like, yeah, let's do it. So I think our publisher and our editorial director, they definitely look at balancing the list to that end. Like we're not going to do 4 baking books in a single season. Like we definitely want breathing room. I mean, every book can't be a huge bestseller. So, and they do take a lot of time too. So I think it's a matter of making sure everything's balanced in terms of subject matter and competition, pub date, as well as like author platform size and things like that.
Mm-hmm. Is there anything like right now that you would be so excited to see come across your desk?
Again, I feel like it's an area I'm lacking as an editor because I'm always like, if I'll know it, if I see it.
Yeah.
But I guess whenever I explain my interests to agents or, other editors, it's mostly, I'm a zillennial, I guess, or a younger millennial. So I feel like things that would interest that group would really interest me. I feel like my eating habits reflect my interest in books as well. Like super diverse interests, foods of any cuisine, really. I really love exploring and traveling. So if that's reflected in anything, that's really exciting to me. And then, I used to want to be a literary fiction editor. And so if the writing is really compelling and beautiful, like that's definitely something I get really excited about. It's just, like, what kinds of restaurants do you like to go to? Or like, what do you like to eat? I feel like it's such a wide net to cast.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned literary fiction, Sarah. And it made me think of, seems like there's a growing interest in storytelling, memoir type, in cookbooks and food writing. I'm wondering sort of what you think about that.
I don't think a cookbook is just a collection of recipes.
Mm-hmm.
I think people can dismiss cookbooks as just that, or just see it as like pictures and recipes and food, and maybe don't take it seriously enough. I personally love, even if it's not a cookbook that I worked on, just like browsing through and reading the headnotes and hearing the stories and the context and the origins of the foods. There's cookbooks that, like Jacques and Dory, I feel like are great examples of educators and teachers of like techniques and different ways you can play around with the food, like the basics, the foundations, and how to elevate your cooking. But there's also cookbooks that I really love that explore, different food ways, the histories and things like that. So I think when I see a cookbook, if it's just a collection of recipes, to me, it's not very compelling. I feel like that also means it's not going to be compelling to a reader or someone who's committing to spend like over $30 on a cookbook.
And you're going to spend 2 years or more with that book. And so you want something that's going to really have a depth to it. Keep you and your team engaged with it.
And excited. Yeah.
Right.
Once you acquire a book, is there anything that makes an author especially great to work with?
I would say, you're working with a team. We're not your employees. So one thing that I really appreciate when I work with an author is when they're really a good team player. They're understanding, it's an actual conversation. We both want your book to be a huge success and to be as beautiful as it is and to be as well received as possible. I don't know, it's such a low standard, but it would be great. I really appreciate it when an author is great to work with in terms of like with our team and things like that, and communicative and open, and just having a positive working relationship is something that I definitely don't take for granted. I think in terms of like work specifics, like on cookbooks and stuff like that, like just asking questions is great. Just having conversations. I feel like I'm thinking more of things that I don't like, which I don't want to go into.
You
Pet
can.
peeves of a cookbook editor. Could be a separate podcast.
I think my general advice is just work together, have a conversation. Everyone's doing their best, and to just trust that.
Meet your deadline if you can.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I feel like that's I just take that for granted. I'm like, of course you'll meet your deadline.
Right. And if you're not going to let us know
yes, please,
as far in advance as you can, because there's always that, no, I'm sure I'll get to it. But I'm wondering if you want to say anything about any titles you have coming up in the spring or even the fall that you're excited about.
Yeah, I just, Hot Sheet by Olga Masov and Snai Lemwan just published earlier this week. And that's something that really surprised me when the proposal first came across my desk. It was beautiful because they both have impeccable taste. But I think before that, I was a little pretentious and I really wanted to work on the really big academic kind of cookbooks. And when I first got it, I was like, it's a sheet pan cookbook. It seems very, down market. And when I read the proposal, it actually surprised me and subverted all of my expectations of what a sheet pan meal could be or what it could do. So I really highly recommend that one. That one has really just upgraded my weeknight cooking to a whole new level. And it's not just weeknight dinner recipes. It's breakfast, holiday stuff, desserts. It's really fantastic. And I'm just really blown away with the kind of innovative recipes that they included.
It's a great title too.
Yeah, that's what caught my eye initially too.
We're actually having them on the show soon.
Oh, that's exciting. They're so lovely. I love them.
Yeah, we're really excited to talk to them.
And then I also have another book titled Newt by Newt Nguyen. He's a TikToker. He's a little younger than I am, or a lot younger than I am. But he has over 10 million followers on TikTok, and I actually followed him before his proposal hit my desk. But he's so funny, and I feel like the way he tells his stories while he's cooking is really engaging, and that really comes through in the book.
We started this whole podcast because as authors, it can be so obtuse and so hard to know what's going on the other side of publishing. And so I just really appreciate your time and your openness to talk about, what it's like to be a cookbook editor.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sarah.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you for listening to Everything Cookbooks. For more episodes and ways to contact us, go to our website, everythingcookbooks.com. The show is also available on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your audio. And if you like what you hear, please leave us a review. It really does help. Any book mentioned in the show can be found on our affiliate page at bookshop.org. Thank you, as always, to our editor, Abby Circatella. And until next time, keep on writing, reading, and cooking.